So what happens if both these theories are losers? Well, the answer is economists, in their infinite wisdom, they get out their blender and they make an economic smoothie, which we refer to as a synthesis. So there's a synthesis. And the synthesis is a whole bunch of different economic ideas that are brought together rather than just saying, oh, we're the classicals or the Keynesians. We take a lot of classical economics ideas. We take Keynesian ideas. There's a thing called supply-side economics, which is another version of classical economics. And some of that idea gets put in here. Some new ideas from the real business cycle people and the new classicals and new. There's a whole bunch of ideas, let's just say, that get squished together in this synthesis. And we come out with a kind of agreed upon system the way we're going to look at economics, macroeconomics. All right? And that agreed upon idea is essentially that classical economics is right in the long run. And how long you have to be in the long run and all these other questions, right? You don't criticize it because the long run, though you could, and we'll talk about that before we're done. Because it's the philosophical idea. Maybe markets work right if we give them enough time to sort things out, but maybe there are times when in the instant that something's happening, the market doesn't work right. And so we have an economic problem that's caused by this market not doing what we think it ought to do, but eventually it'll get around to doing what it should do. And yeah, that's how we get from, A to B. So there's a synthesis that tries to combine elements of all these ideas. Good? Good. All right. So out of this comes the new Keynesian idea about sticky wages and prices, that recessions and other economic problems are caused by sticky wages and prices. And it turns out that it was Milton Friedman that first kind of talked that way, of famous people. And then we have these questions of how long does it take to get to equilibrium? And should we do something to try to speed that up? Would we have to wait a really long time to get back to things being normal if a recession starts? Or can we just wait around? Yeah, right? So we had, at the start of the big coronavirus recession, Congress passes a bunch of laws. They spend a bunch of money. Economy is, in trouble. They do some things to try to fix it. They come back and they say, hey, the Democrats come back pretty quick and say, hey, we want to do some more. And the Republicans said, hey, let's just wait and see how the first part did. Okay? That's a disagreement about how long it takes the economy to start fixing itself, to get onto its track of, all right? So in this synthesis, this classical economy is still going to hold in the long run. So it's classical economics in the long run, but maybe not, from day to day. Okay, so this model that has all this stuff in it is called aggregate demand and aggregate supply. It's real GDP versus the price level. Okay? And real GDP is real. You probably could have figured that out on your own. If I give you a test question that said, which of the following is real? And one of the answers was real GDP. You'd probably pick real GDP. And the price level, which is nominal. So the price level is, am I paying $1 in rent, $1,000 in rent, or $5,000 in rent? The real is I have an apartment, right? That apartment is a real thing. It doesn't change regardless of what rent I'm paying. The rent is a nominal thing that sits on top of that real thing, that apartment. Okay? Yeah. All right. So let's talk about aggregate demand. Aggregate demand is a relationship between the price level and the quantity of real GDP that's demanded. And that's pretty much a meaningless statement. Aggregate demand is about how much consumers are going to spend at different prices, how much they plan on spending at different prices. There's only going to be one price level that exists. And so that's what they're going to end up spending. But we have different, and it's not the price, it's the price level. So we already talked about the CPI, right, which is 250 now. You know, it was 100 in 1983, it's 250 now. That's what we're talking about. Are we at 100? Are we at 250? Are we at 50? This kind of, what's the CPI kind of thing, okay? So as prices are different, as the prices go up or the prices go down, we may change the amount of money we plan on spending at those prices. And that's what aggregate demand is about. Okay? So let's remember our equations here. That GDP equals C plus I plus G plus net exports, and it also equals C plus S plus T. So what goes in aggregate demand? Well, probably C and I and G and NX and C and S, yeah. So aggregate demand includes consumption and investment and government spending and exports and imports, which are both in the NX, and savings and taxes. Plus, it also includes the money supply, which is part of the bigger picture of all of this. So changes in any one of those things are going to change aggregate demand. Okay? Exciting? Okay. All right. So let's draw a graph. It looks like this. We have the price level, not an individual price, but the price level on the y-axis and real GDP on the x-axis. And we have an aggregate demand curve that we draw. And this one says that the price level is 100. Real GDP will be $10 trillion. Okay? And we draw this curve downward sloping. But we need to explain why it's downward sloping. Because why? Well, here's why. All prices are in the price level. That includes the wages that businesses are paying their workers and interest rates. Why? Well, the wages, again, are a price. Businesses are paying it. Okay? And interest rates are a price. They're the price of going and getting money from the bank or wherever you're getting money from. They're a price. So interest rates and wages are built into this. So the idea of this is what we would call the real wage. The idea of this is when prices go up, your salary goes up with it, your pay goes up with it. And when prices go down, your pay goes down too. But you don't care about your pay going down because what matters to you is real, not nominal. You don't care. You'd rather get paid, again, you'd rather get paid $20,000 and have prices where they are in 1950 than get paid $50,000 and have prices where they are in 2020. Okay? Got that? Hopefully? Hopefully? All right. So, wages, interest rates, prices, aggregate demand. Why does this curve slope downward? There's a bunch of reasons. Number one is, your book calls it the wealth effect. Other people call it the real balance effect or even the Pagoo effect, but the real balance effect is also very common. Real balance. You've got savings. You got $1 million put away in your 401k and you're going to retire. And then prices double. What just happened to that $1 million that you have in your 401k? Yeah, it's not worth anything anymore. It's worth $500,000. And now you can't retire because you don't have enough money. Okay? Everybody with me on this? What happens to your savings? So, your savings is affected by the value of prices. And how you spend and how you live your life is affected by your savings, right? If you're thinking about retiring, your savings here are a big deal. Okay? I don't know any other way to say that. Your savings here are a big deal. It's either called the wealth effect or the real balance effect. Same thing if you think about the fact that you own a house, maybe, or someday you're going to own a house. Your house payment stays the same for 30 years. If prices are going up and your wages are going up, the value of your house is going up, your house payment doesn't change. It stays the same. Okay? That's going to affect your consumption because all of a sudden, when you bought that house, you're paying $1,000 a month. When you bought that house, you were making $3,000 a month. Now you're making $6,000 a month, but you're still paying $1,000 a month in house payment. Instead of the house payment being a third, it's a sixth. Okay? We got that? Hopefully. Number 2, the interest rate effect. Remember that interest rates are the price of money. Okay? And businesses, usually when they do big investment, business builds a big factory or we build a hotel on the strip. We do something big and expensive like that. We're going to borrow the money to do it. Okay? A few of the hotels on the strip, like the Excalibur, were built without any borrowed money. They were built out of cash flow. But almost every hotel on the strip, the Bellagio, the Mirage, New York, Mandalay Bay, MGM, you just go up and down the strip. That money was borrowed to build those hotels. Okay? Wynn, Encore, borrowed money to build those hotels. Interest rates affect your willingness to borrow money. If you have to pay 10% interest, you're probably not going to build a hotel in Las Vegas. If you're paying 2 or 3% interest to borrow that money, okay, for sure we're going to build it. If we charge 5 or 6, right? If we have to borrow that money, we got to pay it back. The interest affects how big our payments are. We need a payment we can afford, right? Yeah. So when interest rates are high, we're going to invest less. And the same thing happens to consumers. If you're thinking about buying a house or a car, you don't want to pay 10% or 14%. You want to pay 4%, 3%, right? And so interest rates also affect consumers. Interest rates, which are a nominal thing, affects consumers buying real things like houses and cars, right? So there's this relationship from the interest rate effect between interest rates and businesses and between interest rates and consumers. Okay. Then there's what's called the international trade effect. What happens if prices were to fall in the United States? Let's suppose that prices fell 20% this year in the United States. They just dropped. Well, we Americans would all of a sudden be less interested in buying things that were made in other countries because now U.S.-made things would be cheaper and things in other countries would be more expensive. And people who live in other countries would go, hey, stuff cheap over there. There's cheap stuff to be had over there in America. And they would come here and buy more of our stuff because it would be cheap. We got that? Does it make sense? So lower prices in the United States means more exports for us and fewer imports. Higher prices in the United States means we're going to buy more stuff. If all of a sudden prices in the U.S. are going up, that makes cheap stuff from China even cheaper. That makes cheap stuff from anywhere look cheaper. It makes expensive stuff from Europe look cheaper. Okay? So consumers all over the world are comparing the prices in one country to another, and changes in those prices affect those consumers' behavior. Okay. Now, remember that we have this whole thing about shifting the curve or moving along the curve. So if the price level changes, the AD stays in the same place and goes up and down. Other things change other than the price level, then the aggregate demand curve shifts. Okay? What makes aggregate demand shift? Well, number one, changes in monetary and fiscal policy, and I have slides on this, so changes in monetary and fiscal policy, changes in expectations, and changes in international variables. Got that? So these three things affect aggregate demand: monetary and fiscal policy, expectations, right? And some of this stuff is easy. I shouldn't have to tell you about expectations. If I think the future is going to be really good, well, that encourages me to go out and invest and do stuff, right? If I think the future is going to suck, well, that discourages me from going out and investing and buying. And right? If I'm worried about my job, I'm not going to buy a house. If I'm sure not only that my job is good, but I'm in line to get a big raise, go and buy a house. Okay? It's my vision of the future. Okay? My vision of the future.